accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode number 162 of the podcast of OA. During this COVID crisis, we're your weekly dose of Green Lantern goodness to try to keep everybody's willpower charged. And I like to normally say that Hal Jordan is my co-pilot, but my co-pilot on this podcast is my buddy Phil Bova. Phil, my friend, how are you?
I'm doing good, man. I'm hanging in there. Social distancing is at its peak, and I'm staying home. Taking walks in the park every once in a while, taking the dogs out for a stroll, but that's really about it, man. That's all anybody can really do. Just enjoy what you can.
Yeah, you find enjoyment in other things.
I mean, you have to. I mean, that's just the way it is. But hey, we're getting by, and sooner or later this is bound to pass. I just wish people would be more smart about it, but you know.
Yeah, we've got a lot of cases of people not following the guidelines, and the more that people do this stuff and the more it continues to spread, the longer this is going to go on. I live in New York State, and we've been hit, I think, probably the hardest out of any of the states so far. And I've been lucky in our county, only one person has passed away, and we've had maybe, I don't remember how many cases, but we haven't hit 100 yet. But we're also a relatively small part of the state, so we've been pretty lucky. But you have people that are like, well, nobody is really getting it here, so we can relax more. And you really can't afford to do that because you don't know whether you're carrying it with you right now and don't even know it, because it affects everybody in a different way. And while you may not have those signs, you could pass it on to somebody who'd be much more vulnerable. So we all have to do our part. We all have to be the superhero in this.
We do. I mean, and like you said, just be smart about it, And we had, I think we had an instance. Somebody was talking about somebody protesting here in the St. Louis area, but man, but this whole protesting thing, I get it, man, but it's not the time to be. I don't know. I'm not going to get too embroiled with it, but it's just not the time to be that kind of ignorant. Sorry. People've
got a lot of cabin fever right now, and I think when you don't see it striking in a way that's visually apparent, it's easy to maybe take for granted the fact that that's going on. But at any rate, you and I are here to talk about Green Lantern stuff, and we've got, I think, a really good episode lined up for this week. We're going to have Mark Marble from the Lanterncast joining us for the You Are the Core segment. And we're going to do a retro review of Kyle Rayner Volume 1. We promise this time, even if it makes the episode go long, I promise we're going to do it this episode.
We'll get it done.
I'm excited about that. There's not a whole lot of Green Lantern news going on, but there is one thing I do want to talk about, and I know everybody's got kind of a different opinion about what this all means, but we all know that Diamond Distribution Company, basically they have a monopoly on getting comic books to the shops, and they shut down their production facilities, even though I don't think DC and Marvel and the other publishers were really ready to do that. And DC has, in the last week or so, come out and said they're going to do something a little different to get comics into the hands of readers. And what they've done is they've partnered with, and this is where it gets interesting. There's an online company called DCBS Service, the Discount Comic Book Service, that basically you can do online comics at a discount. You fill out an Excel spreadsheet and they ship you your books every month. There's that company, and then there is Midtown Comics, which is a comic shop in New York City, and they're two of the largest mail order comic book retailers in the United States, and they have spawned two sister companies called Lunar Distribution Company and UCS Comic Distributors. And they are now going to be distributing DC Comics in addition to Diamond Comics. So essentially, comic shops would have three distributors to choose from. But these other two distributors, these two new companies, each serving about half of North America, they've kind of split the continent up into an eastern half and a western half. They're going to be shipping comics. And even though Diamond has said they're not going to do something until mid to late May, these two new companies, Lunar and UCS, are going to start in April. So DC has put out a revised distribution schedule for both print and digital comics starting next week, April 28th. And New Comic Book Day would not be on Wednesday, but on Tuesday. And what that means for Green Lantern is that on Tuesday, May 5th, the Green Lantern Season 2, Number 3 is set to be released. And on Tuesday, May 12th, Justice League and Justice League Odyssey are both set to be released. And again, both in print and digital formats. The kicker is what happens if your local comic shop doesn't choose to buy from these distributors? They're not going to have the books. So I think it creates this really weird situation. I don't know, Phil, what do you think about it?
Well, I mean, I guess it would benefit if your local comic book stores do some kind of delivery service or can ship them to you. I guess it would be a benefit to them, but I don't think a lot of them are doing that. And the issue I have with it is a lot of places are closed. I mean, a lot of shops are closed, and a lot of shops probably don't do that. So I don't know what they hope to gain, especially considering that DC Comics is closed in California. I don't know how they expect to work that out with the merchants, like Apotheosis up the road. I mean, I'm sure that they're looking forward to getting their stuff. They deliver though, so yeah, it may be a benefit to them, but I don't know how you can just make a distribution change willy-nilly like that just because you want to get your product out there. And reflectively thinking about it, I'm sure people are ticked off because they're not getting their new books. I mean, I am just as much as the next person, but I also am smart enough to understand the circumstances we're under, and if we have to put things on hold for the sake of everything that's going on, it's understandable, because I don't want to see local comic book shops not being able to get their books, and then next thing you know, it's going to start a hailstorm of people. Well, wait a minute, DC is shipping their stuff. Why don't we have any of our books? Why can't you get any of our books? Well, our shop is closed. We don't deliver. We're not allowed to have people in our shop. I think it's going to cause more problems than it's going to put out fires. And I don't think it's a wise decision, but then again, at the end of the day, I mean, DC and Time Warner and the decisions that they make don't always make a lot of sense. I mean, and I guess that's why you and I are just sitting here in respectively New York and St. Louis, and doing podcasts and stuff. We're not the ones making those kind of choices, and I don't know. I just think it's going to tick off a lot of fans, and I think it's going to cause a lot more confusion at the end of the day. I'm happy about it, don't get me wrong, but I can wait. I mean, I don't want to wait, but I can wait until things start leveling out to where we can enjoy things with a clear conscience, I guess you can say. But I guess I'm probably in the minority of thinking that.
I don't know. I was thinking about it myself, and back before Diamond closed down, I think a lot of shops were thinking about how can I continue to serve my customers, and a lot of them were coming up with ideas of drive up, pick up your comics, or I know here locally where I am, I only really have one shop, and they were talking about partnering with local. Right around the corner from him, there's a guy who's got an ice cream stand and also does Texas Hots and that kind of stuff. And because it's a walk-up kind of a merchant, and it's considered dining out, it's takeout more or less, he's considered an essential business and can be open. So my local comic shop is going to partner with him and allow people to pick up their comics at his location because it's already a takeout location. And but when Diamond shut down, that kind of put the kibosh, as it were. I don't even know where that word comes from, but I can't stop saying it. But it kind of put the brakes on that whole idea. So now I think you've got shops thinking, well, if I do this, I'm only going to have, I think if you look at it, there's only, I think 5 books coming out on April 28th. 2 of them are reprints. There are 7 books coming out the second week, and one of those is a facsimile edition. And there are 5 books the third week. So is a shop going to perhaps overextend themselves when they're only going to have 5 new books? So I can see this backfiring in a major way. Yeah,
I can too. I was thinking the other day, I don't understand. I'm not sure how the how the economics works behind when distributors purchase the comic books, like Apotheosis, when he was talking about how his system works, I'm sure that they purchase a certain amount of books and they sell them to the fans or whatever the case may be, and I'm certain that Apotheosis gets some out of the money, and then some of the money goes back to DC, and so on and so forth. What I was thinking is, why wouldn't they open up some kind of, and I know a lot of comic book shops probably can't do this, but reflectively open up some kind of digital aspect to their store, to where, yes, DC and Marvel could still deliver their comic books digitally, and in a sense, you can download them from your local comic book store, and they would, in a sense, get some of the money, and of course, DC Comics and Marvel would get some of their money. But I guess the technicality would be too complex.
They used to have a thing with Comixology where your local retailer could have a special URL. And when you use that URL, like your local, like let's use Apotheosis Comics as an example, they could get a link from Comixology that was unique to Apotheosis. And so you as a customer could use that link to go and buy your digital comics, and they would get a percentage of the sale as an affiliate, more or less. And they did that for a while, and then it just kind of stopped. I don't know whether it was when Amazon bought them out, but that went away, because I used to do that to support my local comic shop, because I was buying digital comics so I could grab the digital images for my reviews. And I still do that, but I no longer have a code for my local comic shop. And DCBS Service used to have the same code. And DCBS Service used to do a thing where if you bought your digital comics using their link, you would earn points that you could redeem towards buying physical product from their site as well. So I started to do that when my local shop's code stopped working, and that all seems to have fallen by the wayside. But yeah, there's certainly ways they could do that. I just think it's going to leave fans upset who aren't jumping onto the digital bandwagon, want the physical copy, but their local comic shop isn't going to partake of this new model, because you're exactly right. They have to order their books in advance. So what's the order point? What's the order date for these books that are coming out? They've got to move relatively quickly. And do they have the capital to pay for books that they're going to sell, and they only have 5 books for the week? So I got a feeling that it's going to fall flat on its face. I think it would have been smarter had the top publishers gotten together and said, how do we want to do this? Do we want to ride up the storm? Are we capable of getting the books out there that we've already printed, because they would have come out last month? Are we going to have books that we can send out through a different distribution chain? And what does that do to our local comic book store who has been buying all of their stuff from Diamond? Will they have the resources? Will they have the capital to put an order through another distributor? It's interesting. It's going to be very, very interesting. I'm a little concerned about it, to be honest, but we'll see what happens.
Well, again, that's why we're sitting here doing this. We're not part of that decision-making process, I guess, but whatever, man. You and I over the years we've been through storms and we've heard stranger things before. So, I think at this point, people are just kind of trying to be malleable and making up things as we go along to try to do what they can to, like you say, stem the storm. But I don't know, man. I don't know. I would have just left it alone and just wrote it out. And the fans are going to be here. We're all going to be here. We're going to be here when it comes back. And the comic book industry is going to survive. And I know there's been a lot of written stuff about, questioning whether this is going to survive through COVID-19 and the comic book industry and local comic book shops. The thing of it is, it'll survive. It has survived worse times than this before. And it will come through this. We just, dedicated fans have to know that at the end of the day, when this is all said and done, they have to be there to step up to the plate to show that we're the fans that were waiting for this content to be out and to come out. And we just have to prove it to them that we're going to be able, that we're capable of doing that.
Yeah. I guess those who can't run comic book companies talk about them on the internet and podcasts, right?
Yeah, they do. They really do.
All right. Well, we've got a good episode, I think, in store. We've got Mark Marble coming up here shortly, and you've got your Green Lantern fun fact, and we're going to be talking about, Volume 1 of Kyle Rayner.
Volume 1. Yep. Looking forward to it.
So we'll be back in just a couple of moments.
Hello, Green Lantern fans, and welcome to your Green Lantern Fun Fact. Here we go. This is a good one. The Green Lantern Corps is a universe-spanning organization featuring a diverse roster of aliens that includes everything from orange fishmen to sentient planets. But perhaps its most surprising member was none other than Daffy Duck. In 2003, the Looney Tunes icon was starring in his own science fiction flavored spin-off, Duck Dodgers, based on a classic Looney Tunes segment that was a riff on Buck Rogers. In one episode, Daffy endures a dry cleaning mix-up and ends up with Hal Jordan's Green Lantern ring. The episode that follows is not only a funny episode, but also a full-throated celebration of Green Lantern and its mythos, introducing the concept of the Corps and many of its most beloved characters with a surprising level of reverence. And there you have it. Duck Dodgers ends up with Hal Jordan's ring. I don't know if he was worthy or not, and maybe we'll never have the answer to that, but lo and behold, Daffy Duck was a member of the Green Lantern Corps. And you heard it here first on the podcast of Oa.
In blackest day or brightest night, watermelon, cantaloupe, yada yada, superstitious and cowardly lot, with liberty and justice for all.
Then again, maybe I should lead us. In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware our power, Green Lantern's light.
Yay, team!
And welcome back to the podcast of Oa. And this is our favorite segment of the show now, the whole You Are the Core segment. And joining us this week is the other co-host of the Lanterncast. We had Chad Bokelman on last week. This week we're joined by Mark Marble. Mark, welcome to the podcast of Oa. So glad to have you on board.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here as the other co-host of the Lanterncast. It's my lot in life, like C-3PO.
Yeah, we had a good time talking with Chad, and it was funny. We were just talking off mic a minute ago. One of the things we asked Chad was how you and he became the hosts after the original guys decided to leave, and how did you guys inherit the show? And Chad was so deliberate because he didn't want to get it wrong, because he'd gotten it wrong in the past, and he didn't want to face your wrath.
Well, let's hear your version, Mark.
This is kind of funny because there's like three versions here, so I'll try just because yes, I kind of owe Chad this, so I'll do the in quotes version before the real one. This is kind of funny.
Has your show had more reboots than the DC universe? I mean,
no, we actually haven't had any actual reboots. Which was, even though we did consider, that was one question we did talk about when we took over the show in 2013. It's like, should we continue the numbering? Should we start over? And we did the proper decision and kept the numbering because legacy numbering is awesome. As a joke, I mentioned I think I mentioned this to Chad too, in all honesty, but I always mention this. I mentioned it to Jim and said the story I was going to tell when I was prompted about the origin was Jim and Dan were burned out, which was all true, and they were looking to turn over the show to someone else, so they were pretty desperate. So they found Chad drunk in an alley. They said, "You'll have to do," and they gave him the show. And then quickly realized, no, he won't do. So then they sought their most qualified and worthy partner that could handle him. And that was me. But that's not true. Which is funny because, you'll appreciate this. When I told Jim that, he goes, oh, no, you should really, if you're going to tell that story, you should really make it big. Like, you should say that I was the mastermind behind Jim and Dan even starting the podcast. Because I knew someday I would co-host it. And I warned against bringing Chad on, but like something along the lines, like I knew I could handle him when the time came. But all kidding aside, the version Chad told on your podcast is accurate. But the story that he usually told was along the lines that, the first part was always true. That he always made it sound like Jim and Dan were ready to move on, and they gave him But he always made it sound like they gave him the show, and then it was like, oh, then I brought Mark on. That's what he used to always say when it's like, and he would say that like in the middle of an episode when like we had people on. I'm just sitting there shaking my head, and it's like, but what he said last week was accurate. Jim and Dan were ready to go. They were kind of burnt. You could tell they were burned out as a listener. I could tell because I'd been on the show a few times as a guest too. In fact, I think Chad beat me on by like one episode, I believe, in our actual history. I think he went on one episode before I was. But the thing was that they had talked. Jim and Dan had talked amongst themselves, and I think Jim seemed to think that I was the clear-cut choice. I think Dan was pretty sold too, and then they talked to Chad. They figured, and it was a combination of who they thought, who was good for the show, who Chad thought he could work with, and then Jim mentioned it to me, and basically Jim asked me whether I'd be willing, and I said sure. And then in episode 169, that was the episode that they announced that they were leaving, and we were announced as the incoming crew in the same episode. So that's the real. So the last thing I said, the last thing was the real version, not the take that Chad Bokelman version.
So Chad mentioned that he was relatively, considering Green Lantern's history, relatively a newer fan, but that you had been a fan a lot longer. So how long have you been a Green Lantern fan, and what got you interested in Green Lantern?
Green Lantern number 46 with the Reign of the Superman tie-in.
Awesome.
That is actually how I got into Green Lantern. Actually, Reign of the Superman is what kind of brought me back into comics. I was big into comics as a kid, mostly Marvel, not that much DC, but heavy Spider-Man and the Hulk. And I feel privileged to be like in the era when they were doing like the Micronauts and Rom were new because those series were really good. So I was into that and think. But then I stopped for a while. Somewhere it's like you reach that point sometime in your life, and it's like, oh, I'm not a kid anymore, so I should stop maybe being interested in things that I was when I was younger. Until you realize, screw that, you can be interested in anything you want at any time, from a fan perspective and a hobby perspective. So, but it was the Reign of the Superman that kind of got me back into it, and then I picked up that issue as the tie-in with the destruction of Coast City, and then. I was working at Walden Books at the time, I started right around that time too. So that because of having more access to catch up on some things, but I didn't really start reading Green Lantern, ironically, religiously until 51, until Kyle took over. Though I'm a Hal guy, and I retroactively became a Hal guy. But Kyle was the first one I read on a regular basis. That series.
That's a good issue. That's a really good issue to jump in on too.
And it's funny because now it's comical, but I remember when I was working at Walden Books, which is kind of funny. Just cause I listened to your episode with Chad, and he mentioned Borders, and Borders was a bookstore. So that I worked at Walden Books before Borders bought out Walden Books, but I remember putting out like Green Lantern 50. I just kind of flipped through it, and you still see Hal at the end, and I'm thinking, oh, what's the big deal with this issue? Until you go back retroactive, and I was like, oh, now I know what the big deal with this issue was. Oops.
So what, Mark? What would you say the era of Green Lantern comics that interests you the most?
I would say it's probably the early part of Kyle, not necessarily because of Kyle, but because of Parallax. The real Parallax, pre-Fearbug Parallax. When Hal was doing questionable things, but had logical or real motivation that made you at least go, okay, well, how he's going about it is not right, probably, but what he's trying to achieve is arguably correct. So it's that era. And I'd probably say the heart of the Jeff Johns run, probably from the beginning of Rebirth in like 2004 through at least, let's just say through the end of War of the Green Lanterns. The New 52 kind of started it started losing steam relatively quickly in the New 52. So that might have been because he was stretched so thin. I've always thought he was just assigned to too many different things in the New 52 part of his run that he just didn't have enough time in the day to put in anything anymore.
Well, you know, if history is right, or what we've read, was Jeff Johns approached Green Lantern and he had a trilogy in mind, and that was Rebirth and Sinestro Corps War and Blackest Night. And he kind of wondered when he got done with Blackest Night, he's like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do now. I've kind of got everything I planned to do done, and what am I going to do to fill the rest of the time?
I do remember hearing that, and that is probably true. It probably is a master plan, or it could have been like a master plan in flux, like George Lucas, like, oh, it's 9 movies, it's 12 movies, it's 15, depending on whenever you interviewed him or you talked about it. But yes, there was a distinct drop off after Blackest Night. The whole Brightest Day War of the Green Lanterns thing was a lot. It was close to being really good. There were lots of things in it that were good, but then they kind of flushed it, I thought, with the whole parallax mind control of the Green Lanterns, and it being Krona made sense, but I was kind of hoping for Ali Apsa because we haven't seen him in forever. He talked about a character that's been dead, that's way overdue to come back.
It's like Jeff had to come up like George Lucas. He had to create Jar Jar Baz.
Oh yes, yes. As we talked about in our show, the legend that is Simon Baz. What a useless character.
So
Agreed.
What does Green Lantern mean to you? Does it have any special significance to you?
I think so. I think that I like the basic concept of the will. I still remember I was again, because of my bookstore days, I was lucky enough to be able to order like the first quote unquote graphic novel version of Emerald Twilight, because I was into it by then, which is a really thin version, not the Emerald Twilight, like New Emerald Dawn, New Dawn, whatever the combination when they had the first part of Kyle's run. And there was a really cool intro, which of course in retrospect I should have had in front of me to say this, but it just was a nice intro, like in the inside cover about Hal Jordan was bequeathed this wondrous ring, and basically it truly had no limitations, whatever the bearer's imagination and its willpower could think of, it could do, and things like that. And I like that concept. I like the concept that if your will was literally strong enough that you could do almost anything if you were a Green Lantern. So conceptually, I like that. I like the idea of them being chosen. That's why as much as I enjoy Kyle as a character overall, and I did enjoy the run, because I did enjoy the Banks and Mars run. I don't talk to Ron Mars. We've talked to a few times on the show. Daryl, I actually talked to a lot. Because he's done a lot of commissions for me, and I would say I'm friends with Daryl Banks. I guess I wouldn't say that was the same with Ron, not because we have a problem, just because I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't reach that far for that. But I think Daryl and I. So I have a really fondness for that run. But the idea of right place, right time, Green Lantern, which we know they retconned in the New 52, but still the point was that's not really a Green Lantern origin. It's like you were picked for a reason, and that's what I liked about the ring basically picks its successor. I like that concept, and so generally speaking, that's it. And Hal's Parallax meant a lot to me because I liked the idea. First of all, the name was so perfect. I always talk about that. That's why making it the Fear Bug made no sense, because parallax is the idea of viewing things from a different perspective, because the way you're looking at it has changed. The world hasn't changed, but you're looking at it from a different perspective. Such as the classic parallax, your head being on the pillow and you close your eye, close one eye and the pillow's here, and then you switch eyes and the pillow's in a different place. Pillow hasn't moved. You just see it from a different perspective. And that was a perfect name for what Hal became, because he just became so disillusioned and everything. And the idea of desperately trying to do what was right all the time. And there was that quote, I think, from Final Night about how, I've always done what I truly believed was right. And at first people called me a hero and for it, then a villain. And I always thought that was...
That's a cool statement.
Yeah. I thought, and I like the idea of the fallen hero. There's something about the fallen hero that I liked, and just conceptually. going back to my English major roots, maybe like something like a Byronic hero. That's kind of how I saw Hal, because everything was big. That you don't do anything small, so you're right. All your successes are huge, all your failures are huge, and so I think those are the basic things that come to mind when I think of Green Lantern conceptually.
And that's kind of what I felt about the Renegade storyline. I know a lot of people didn't like it, but I genuinely liked it pretty much for the same reasons you just supplied. I mean, he went big, and I thought it was an interesting arc that explored different ways of Hal Jordan taking on his persona, I guess you could say.
No, I did like that storyline. That was another storyline that obviously was cut short because of Convergence and things like that. But it was, I liked it. I still wish they had done more with. And I always like seeing your little Skype icon because you have Convergence Parallax and I have Original Parallax. They just butchered Convergence Parallax so much, so fast. It just makes my head spin. It just bothers me so much. It's like you had this cool version of the character that you kept alive, and plus you made him a hero again because he went back, to Crisis, the time frame of Crisis on Infinite Earths, and he was one of the characters that prevented all the multiverse from being destroyed. And it's like that's something you could see real, that's real Parallax doing because of what he was trying to accomplish and seeking redemption at the same time. And besides the fact that they wrote him really like he was an idiot. They wrote him, even in the miniseries, they wrote him like his IQ dropped like 30 points. And it just never continued. It never got much better. In the Telos miniseries, that didn't get, he was written like he was dumb. It was really weird. Venditti wrote him better from an intellectual perspective, but he still butchered the character really fast. Which is really sad because I remember when he first appeared, like what was it in 48 or whatever it was, paving or at the end of 47, paving the way for what was going to happen in Robert's issue 50. That when he first showed up and he took out the Sinestro Corps members and he found out that Sinestro had a core and mentioned something about the universe being in darkness, but Parallax will bring the dawn. It was like, oh God, I used Twitter, which I almost never use, and messaged Robert and said, "Oh, that was just glorious. It just was." And then like a couple of issues later, it's like, "Oh my God, what happened?" It's like, oh.
So you've already kind of mentioned it, but who would you say your favorite writer is, past or present, on the Green Lantern book?
I'm probably gonna go with Johns because I am a fan overall. I'm a fan of most of what he did. I'm not a sycophant for Johns like some people are. Just like there's some people that are, in a way, in a much lower level, toned down a degree. But in a way, I feel like Johns has kind of been become like he's the Green Lantern writing version of Trump, where like either you seemingly you have to absolutely love everything he does, or you absolutely hate everything he does, and you completely dismiss no matter what. And because I know other shows like they are certain people on them, not you guys and us obviously, but they just tend to always talk about, or even on their websites talk about, oh God, Jeff Johns, like he's the devil, not even acknowledging that. Okay, you may not like everything he did, but he made Green Lantern more popular than it ever was before.
Right. He certainly never had the mainstream appeal until Johns took over him. No,
I mean, you could clearly make the case that for a couple of years that the Trinity was really Hal, Batman, and Superman.
Right.
Based on the significance of the stories and the popularity of the character. Because the reality is Wonder Woman's it's politically incorrect, but Wonder Woman's in the Trinity because she's a chick. Marvel at least doesn't care about that. They realize these are our biggest characters. If one happened to be a female, then it would be. It just isn't, so they don't try to pretend that it is. So, but for that period of time, Hal from pretty much probably at least from Sinestro Corps through Blackest Night, Hal was probably technically de facto the third part of the Trinity. And that's when Green and all the merchandise. I mean, that's one of the things that's really sad now. Besides the fact that if you want to count Far Sector, I know which Myron doesn't, we have 2 books or a book and a half because it's like a rental because we know it's not lasting for much longer. Assuming books start coming out again. Period. but with one book now compared to all the books that we had, and now it's like you'd have to. You don't want to know what you'd have to do to get Green Lantern merchandise now that's of any consequence. And back in the day, it's like every time you picked up previews, it's like all these awesome things that were in previews, all the shirts and the statues and all this stuff. And it's so far removed from that. It's kind of sad. And of course, that's the era Chad and I have been hosting in pretty much the entire time.
Yeah, there was a time where you could collect almost everything because there wasn't a whole lot. And then it got to a point right around 2008, 2009, that time frame, where there was so much stuff that you had to start to pick and choose because your wallet couldn't take the strain of buying it all. And now we're right back to right now you can't find anything hardly at all.
No, it talk about things, and you kind of knew this was going to happen. I mean, everything in life is cyclical, and you knew there was no reason based on history to think Green Lantern could ever sustain that popularity. Though things change. I mean, the X-Men were, from a popularity perspective, were a total disaster pretty much up until like the 80s. The 80s is when they really started building up into what the X-Men became. But there really was no history with Green Lantern to think that this was sustainable. You hoped, but you kind of figured that was the golden age, that was the peak, and it was going to start going downhill. But yeah, the whole Blackest Night thing was amazing. I mean, I still have so many of those shirts that were, the two main types of shirts that came out with for all the cores. I remember the San Diego Comic-Con Hals that I was lucky enough to do like a pre-order on, like name your price and buy it now. And I said, the most I really want to spend is like $40 on each one of these. So there was a set of 5, and I said, okay, $200. And he accepted, or whatever it was, or it was like, okay. It's
wow.
like, yeah. So
those are the only ones I'm missing out of that whole set.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So speaking about collectibles and stuff, we all as Green Lantern fans have, large collections of comics and toys and merchandise. Do you have a favorite item or issue?
Favorite issue. I mean, I do have some Silver Age issues, but I gravitate towards ones that mean something to me from a reading perspective, which is why a lot of these things over time we've done on the show. Like I like Parallax View, Green Lantern 63 and 64, Volume 3. That storyline I thought was really cool, and I liked that was kind of like the beginning in a way of the turning point with Kyle and Hal's relationship. Going along with that, Green Lantern Zero was a great issue. Basically the epilogue to Zero Hour. That was a great issue. I have really fond memories. I think what would have to have been the Green Lantern Rebirth 4 with that splash page, because that's when his spirit goes back into his body. And he steps out of the coffin and he tells Sinestro to get the hell away from them. I remember that. That I remember. I mean, I have a print of that, but that stands out. And
I've always wanted to get a blow up of him punching out Batman.
That's a good one too. That is a cool moment. Not just because of the look on Guy's face, but it's just and there had to be a trade-off for that. It's like, okay, we'll let you do this, but at some point Batman's going to have to return the favor, which of course he does early on in the in Hal's run when the Jeff Johns series started. But Rebirth in general was really not that I like, the whole naming naming the fear bug, or keeping that name for the fear entity I didn't like, but the whole emotional spectrum I was a fan of. I thought that was clever, the way they slowly introduced different cores and the entities but I think most, and of course Rage of the Red Lanterns, I know Chad, that was Chad's first book, so that's relevant to him. To me it's relevant because it introduced Saint Walker, and Saint Walker is awesome, so I will never be unhappy with Saint Walker.
I like Brother Worth. I thought he was cool.
He was cool. Brother Worth was a really, really good character. And I still, even though the decision to make the emotional spectrum finite was certainly questionable, but that issue when all the original Blue Lanterns, other than Saint Walker, were sacrificing themselves, so Kyle could, right? It was so they could teleport, so they could use the Indigo power and teleport out of there. That I still remember that sacrifice was, Brother Worth is cool. That's one of my favorite DC Direct Blackest Night figures. Actually, was Brother Worth.
Yeah, I got him too.
but But from an overall merchandise, one of the things I really like is I like the Hal Jordan versus Parallax statue that they came out with. Because it's designed really well, but I also thought it was really clever because the way they had the two parts of Hal held together by a magnet, and that's how you put it inside the tendril of Parallax.
Yeah, I missed that one. That was one I really wanted, and I couldn't get my hands on it.
And that was all. And that's when we were I think we had already peaked, but still we were getting a good amount of merchandise, just like when they restarted all the power batteries, making the cheaper matte finish power batteries, which are pretty nice. And then they shafted us by either that because they couldn't make up their mind what they were going to do with the Indigo Tribe, whether they were going to give us a battery which technically would be incorrect but would match the set, or whether they were going to give us a staff who would be correct but stand out. Instead, they gave us nothing and they stopped the line without finishing it. And that's the only reason I got the Star Sapphire battery, because I got it after the fact. I chose not to get it because I don't care so much about the Star Sapphires. And it's like, but I said, if they come out with the Indigo Lantern or whatever staff, whichever version, it's like, I'm not going to have the complete set. So I ended up getting it retroactively, like as a birthday gift. And then, of course, it's like, guess what? We're not making it. We're not making the Indigo staff. It's like,
You should fabricate your own, man.
I know the staff would be really nice. It would have been clever, and you could see it both ways. Why, if they were gonna go down that road, which way they would, why it would be problematic. To me, if they have just done the central power, if they said, oh, we're gonna do this because it kind of looks like the Indigo central power battery, I'd be okay with it because I used all those hero clicks from like the War of Light. I have all of my respective hero clicks in those cores around those power batteries from the second line.
Hero clicks are cool. I used to be big into those.
Yeah, I bought a lot of the booster bricks and things, I think on eBay and stuff and things like that, because I never got an entity, I never got an entity which stunk. Sometimes they tease you because you look at things, it's a construct thing, but it's not an entity. It's like, but I did get I got some really cool hero clicks, and the sculpts on those were amazing for their size.
So, Phil, we've got time for one more question, so I'll let you take the last one.
All right, I got it. So, Mark, what would you say? Do you read your Green Lantern books digitally, or do you prefer hard copies from your local comic book shop?
I prefer hard copy. I don't mind reading a book digitally. I know when I have to do the review, when we have to do stuff for the show, I really don't like the digitals. I find it much more difficult to be able to, especially if you have to go back. If let's say you're doing the recap, it's not so bad because you get it, sized the way you want, and then you just know you're going to be going from. But then if you have to go back and look for something, like if Chad mentioned something on a certain page, and it's like, okay, then I find it a little harder to find on a digital. I'm getting better with it, but overall, I would always prefer, like as an example, what we're doing this week. We're going to be doing Silver Age number 26. Which is when Star Sapphire unmasked Green Lantern, and by luck of the draw, that's the issue in the backup story where Myron is introduced.
Good coincidence.
So, and I've had this sitting around forever, and I know Chad and I talked about it before, and I said, let me just flip through this issue for the hell of it. And I looked in the back, and I said, oh yeah, that is Myron. And it's like, hey, could we plan out like what we're going to do? Not like locked in, this is this week and this is next week, but we know like we have topics we're going to do, and it's like, yeah, so why don't we just do this one? And part of the reason why it's easy for me to want to do that issue is because I know I physically have that Silver Age issue right in front of me, which I'm flipping through now, and it's like, yes, that would be so it's a double whammy from a story perspective with Carol unmasking Hal and Myron, but given the choice, yeah, I'll take the physical copy.
Right on.
Cool. All right. Well, Mark, we appreciate you coming on the show, and we've appreciated you having us over on your show. I feel like we're kind of the Brotherhood of the Rings,
Yes. We definitely need to do this more often. We always have fun. Like when we did the State of the Green Lantern Union, and coming on your show was really cool. You Chad, I know, appreciates it too, and you guys did a good job with Chad last week. So. Yeah, we should definitely do it more often. We are brothers in arms / brothers in rings here, and
exactly.
and Lord knows it's not an easy time, man.
We got to be each other's content because it's all we got to talk about, except for old books.
That is true. That is true. Even though there's light at the end of the tunnel, but yeah, the reality is, yeah, it makes you long for that, like Star Trek or Star Trek Planet of the Apes crossovers.
All right, man. Take it easy. Again, thanks for coming on. We loved having you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was fun as always.
To tell you the story of Green Lantern is to tell you the story of the birth of a universe. The origins of DC as a whole.
It's a magic emerald meteor from space in the 1940s.
It's the establishment of the JSA.
It's the birth of the Silver Age.
It's the introduction of a universal police force.
It's the formation of the JLA.
It's the emergence of the multiverse.
It's a crisis in both space and time.
It's an emerald dawn.
And it's an emerald twilight.
It's the brightest day.
And the blackest night.
And the Lanterncast covers all of this and everything in between. We're Green Lantern's greatest advocates and fiercest critics. We've been fans for years, and it's the reason we're self-proclaimed Lanternologists.
So find us on iTunes and Stitcher and give us a listen. Because the history of Green Lantern really is the history of the DC Universe. And we've got the interviews, commentaries, reviews, and more to back it up.
All right, Lantern fans, welcome back. And here we go. I promised that I was going to do some Kyle Rayner stuff, and I'm going to do it here. So I'm pulling this out of Kyle Rayner Volume 1. It's collected. But a little background. Now, I got back into the Green Lantern mythos with Kyle Rayner when he came out in the 90s. I was a big fan of him. Really liked the story arcs. I really enjoyed his character. But over the course of time, I started going back in and getting more in depth with Hal and started reading more about Hal. And to this day, I'll always have a spot in my heart for Kyle Rayner. It just won't never be as great as it would be for Hal Jordan, mainly because I got more vested in Hal Jordan's character, and I was more interested in his persona than I ever was and ever could relate with Kyle. So, a little background into this issue. We're going with Green Lantern issue number 51. It's the first issue of Kyle Rayner as Green Lantern. So, I guess you can say how we start off with this, and Myron, you probably ought to touch base on this. But in '94, the sales of the Green Lantern were sagging, and I think a lot of stuff during that time frame was kind of lagging behind. Superman was kind of lagging, Batman was kind of lagging. So they came up with this concept of having all these big heroes have big groundbreaking releases on their comic books. Superman had the death by Doomsday. Batman had his back broken by Bane. So Hal Jordan, of course, was the golden boy. They decided to have him go more or less ape, and he killed all the core members except for 3. And then he turned into a homicidal maniac. And one power ring was left, and would be given to a rookie who was basically was kind of forced to work out stuff on his own. So we fast forward to Green Lantern 51, and a poor struggling artist, kind of like a comic-y type character, Kyle Rayner, ends up being confronted by a small blue alien named Ganthet, and he's given the power ring, the last quote-unquote power ring. Didn't get a training manual, no help except from his girlfriend in this issue, oddly enough. So we go into issue 51, written by Ron Mars, and Daryl Banks did the artwork for this one, and it kind of starts off with Kyle Rayner getting thrown through, oddly enough, what looks like a ladies' lingerie shop. So his name's Kyle Rayner. He doesn't know what he's doing, and he's going to be maybe telling us that someday. When we turn the page, it kind of shows him facing off against whatever this guy is, his Ohm character. And this is where I think you'd be able to interject, Myron. It's funny that Kyle Rayner shows up because guess whose costume he's wearing?
Right. He doesn't have his own customized suit yet, so the ring has kind of automatically created the generic Green Lantern uniform.
Right, which oddly enough looks similar to Hal Jordan's character. So Kyle Rayner faces off against his own character. Now, keep in mind, I'm trying to put myself back in the 90s when I first read this issue, because I'll be honest with you, I think at that time I had only dabbled in some Green Lantern books, so I didn't really have a broad concept of what your Green Lantern stood for. And this is where I think a lot of the fans of that era picks up, and that's where a lot of fandom picks up on Kyle Rayner being their first Green Lantern, because relatable content, I mean, he's a no guy, he's kind of a nobody, and he ends up with this ring basically by chance. The ring didn't choose him. He wasn't without fear. He didn't have the ability to overcome fear. He was just, Ganthet was there at that time, at that place, and Kyle Rayner ends up with a ring.
Yeah, I mean, Kyle represented the everyman, and this was DC trying to make a Marvel type character. Right,
which is what I was going to ask you. I was like, I'm kind of confused on why Kyle Rayner of all people would end up with a ring, but yeah, so he's the everyman. So he faces off against Ohm, and he gets his feet, and it doesn't go well for him. So then it goes into just last night, and he runs into his girlfriend, and he shows his girlfriend. I forgot her name. Oh God, did they give her name on this?
I think
Alex DeWitt.
Alex DeWitt.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And he kind of shows off his ring, kind of similarly to how Ryan Reynolds showed off his ring to his buddy in the movie. And of course she's taken back. She doesn't know what to think, whatever. But oddly enough, Alex is the brains behind this tandem, and she steps up to the plate to try to help him train and help him get acclimated to the ring. And I think Kyle Rayner at that time, and I remember having this feeling because, when this came out, I was just coming out of high school. This was 93, I think this was released, and and I had just graduated high school in 1992, so I didn't have a lot of grasp on everything, and I was the injured guy, I was being hurt by the girls and stuff, and I think the funny thing about Kyle was he felt like this was going to be a way in to get with Alex DeWitt, which I think was his ex-girlfriend at the time. So they do their ramblings back and forth. So she decides to take him out, and they run. This is where he runs into Ohm, and she basically kind of, hey, this is your chance. You're responsible for this. You need to step up to the plate here. And oddly enough, Kyle does. He puts on the ring, and it's a really cool shot of him when he's sitting in the Jeep. He's got these what look like Superboy type glasses on. And he puts the ring on, and he transforms, and he look out, world, here comes Green Lantern. And he goes right after Ohm, takes him on, and he handles himself pretty well. It's a pretty cool battle. It's a one-off, so it's his first foray into being a hero and stuff. And I thought what was really, really cool about this issue when I reread it was, I've read a lot of Kyle since then, and look at what he's become. I mean, he was Ion and Parallax, and he was the ring bearer that took on the many different aspects of the emotional spectrum, and let alone becoming the White Lantern. And this is Kyle in his infancy, and it's so funny to retro read this because of how much has passed since then. And I haven't touched base with Kyle Rayner since this time frame. I mean, when I first read this back when it came out, and I got to thinking, like, oh my gosh, here's this guy that has come so far in his career as being a Green Lantern Corps member, and thinking about it comparatively to Hal, and they both traveled. Obviously, the depth of their different worlds, but Kyle's no different in that respect to Hal Jordan, because they've both been through a lot. And now I won't say he's done as much as Hal Jordan has done in his career as being Green Lantern by far, but I guess when I compare the two individuals as far as what they've accomplished and what they've overcome, I got to say, my hat's off to Kyle, because reading this and where I'm at now and how much has happened since that time, obviously, I mean, Kyle has done a lot with his career, having the ring, So he battles home, takes him on, and then he ends up beating him at the end, and then pulls the guy out of him. Of course, it was just a guy in a suit, which is typical to that time frame or whatnot. And the reporters end up showing up, and then Alex pulls him out of the way. Of course, gets him out of there just in time. And then at the end, they sit on the beach, and they're having their little moment. He's got his University of Southern California T-shirt on. He's this cool artist guy and stuff. And very cool image, though, at the end of the issue. He changes his uniform into what is known as Kyle Rayner's uniform this day. And that's pretty much where the issue leaves off.
That whole issue was kind of like the first issue for Kyle Rayner as Green Lantern without having to be connected to Emerald Twilight, because Ron Mars had to kind of get Hal completely off the stage and introduce Kyle. This was the first chance that he had to spend a whole issue on nothing but Kyle. So it reads very much like a first issue.
Yeah, it really does. And it's good. I mean, I understand why people, myself included, ended up connecting to the character. And like I said, reading it now to what I try to think back to what I knew then, and of course I've come a long way since then, just as much as Kyle has, school, work, career, marriage, and everything. And it's funny reading it because it reads like a fresh issue to me. It's like, okay, here's this guy, he ends up at the ring, and he doesn't know exactly what to do because he's not, like I said, he's not given any blueprint, he's not giving a training manual. He's given an instruction booklet. So he takes it on, and he hesitates, but I think if you put yourself in his shoes, as much as I think anybody would hesitate with that kind of pressure on them at the time. To quote Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, and I got to hand it to Kyle. He stepped up to the plate and he took it on, and he's got bigger things to come with Mogul showing up at the end, or Mongol showing up at the end. But yeah, I liked it. It was fun to read it again, and to all our Kyle Rayner fans out there, I just, I got to say, it was refreshing for me to revisit it because, I still like Kyle. He's still one of my top lanterns. He may not be at the very top, but he's still up there, and he's still a relevant character. I really liked him when they put him in the Omega Men. I thought he was kind of cool where he showed up in there. But at the end of the day, I wish we'd see more of him. I hate to see that he's not being utilized, especially with how much he's done in his realm of the Green Lantern Corps.
The interesting thing about those particular early issues was that Kyle really didn't have any motivation to be a superhero or to use the ring. He didn't have any of that stuff. So in the beginning, you've got Kyle as this carefree, young individual. And it isn't until Major Force kills his girlfriend. And you needed a few issues to build that relationship up so that you could understand Kyle's motivation, to feel an emotional connection between these two characters. That once Ron Mars did that, things got a little more serious. That was, there's a lot of comparisons between Kyle Rayner and Peter Parker. And it isn't, Alex is essentially Kyle Rayner's Uncle Ben at that point. And that whole incident sparked a huge, this was the infancy of the internet at that point, and that's what launched Gail Simone's career. She was very upset over that whole woman in refrigerator thing, and she started a blog about it, and she started writing about this trope of women only being there to be the motivation for the male characters and so on. And people took note to that, and that's what kind of launched her career. But that whole set of stories, and then as Kyle starts to interact with the DC universe at large and learning about the legacy and the responsibility that comes with that ring, then his motivation became not so much about Alex, but about trying to live up to the reputation or live up to the responsibility that comes with the ring because of the legacy that was left behind. So it really transformed that character to some degree.
That was a really controversial issue. I mean, people still talk about it to this day.
Oh yeah. And for Kyle, a lot of it was, it was the everyman thing. It was a way to clean the slate. For some people now, myself, you mentioned you were just graduating high school. So I was just turning 30. So for me, I had a harder time relating to Kyle, not just because of what he represented and what they did with Hal. That obviously made it a little bit more of a burden for me, or a bit more of an obstacle for me. But I couldn't relate to Kyle because I was already much older than him and didn't, his motivations didn't strike me as, if I got the ring, I know what I would be doing with it, and I wouldn't be messing around with it. I'd be doing something with it. But that's a difference of age. So I had a hard time connecting with the character. And I read the Kyle stories for probably about a year or so before I gave up on it. I tried to give it a good effort. I wanted to give the character a chance. I just found that the connection was like, this is going to sound wrong, and I don't want it to sound wrong, but I'd already read Spider-Man, and I thought Stan Lee and Ditko did it much better. And so I had a hard time. There wasn't anything there for me that I hadn't already experienced. Even though I love Green Lantern, I'd lost the mythology that I was so in love with that it made it really hard for me to just enjoy it. So for me, I checked out.
That makes sense coming from your perspective as opposed to mine. I mean, we're close in age, but we're enough off the mark to where you were more impacted earlier on by different characters in different books than I was coming in later on, and I kind of misspoke. This came out in May 1994, not 93. I think I said 93 earlier, but came out in May 94. So, basically I was 20 years old at the time. And,
right. I think our age difference now doesn't mean as much as it would have meant back in 1994 between a 20-year-old and a 30-year-old.
No, definitely not. It would have been a lot different back then.
But the one thing that despite fans like myself who were disgruntled and they took the ring away from Guy and made him an alien and made him with the alien DNA, and they took John Stewart and put him in a wheelchair and got rid of the whole core thing. That was a lot to give up. But the one thing that Kyle benefited from was that he got more development in that 10 years he was the lone Green Lantern than John or Guy ever really got. I mean, they had times when they were the number one Green Lantern, but it was relatively short-lived. And so Kyle really benefited from having a dedicated character development in a series that he anchored for a good long time. So I think that really helped build him up. And for a lot of fans, back in the 90s when they would do these stunt events, it allowed people to embrace the Green Lantern mythology without feeling that they needed to know all the history. And for some people, that makes it easier to jump on board. So I totally get it. Yeah.
Good point, man. It's really cool because later on, of course, 0 Hour starts later on, and I still remember back when Kyle first met Superman, and Superman had the mullet at the time.
What we should do for the next episode is we should do Emerald Knights. That was the story in which a time-traveling Hal Jordan meets Kyle Rayner, and he doesn't know his future. And so basically Hal is pulled forward. We'll have to find those issues. Maybe we'll do that for the next episode because that was really neat because it was a team up and Kyle almost becomes the senior person to Hal at that point. And how does he let Hal interact with the world around him? Because Hal basically is brought into the future, not knowing what his future is.
What, excuse me, what issues were those?
I don't remember. I'll have to look them up, but I'll text them to you after the episode gets done and I get a chance to look them up because that would definitely be worth a reread. And I think it's a neat story.
Yeah, let me know because I have a lot of collected digital, so I wouldn't mind trying to find those and rereading them myself. That'd be a good idea.
Okay, all right, we'll do that for the next one.
Cool.
All right, well, let's take a quick break and we'll come back and we'll close out the show.
All right, sounds great.
This is Salak, Green Lantern of Sector 1418, and you are receiving the podcast of Oa.
The podcast of Oa.
All right, Phil, that wraps up episode number 162. I think this was a great episode. I love talking to Mark and, listening to him. And you can obviously, you can tell in his comments his passion and love for the Green Lantern mythology. So I love these segments. I think we may keep them on after this whole COVID-19 thing is over with. We may keep them on anyway. Maybe not as every episode, but at least an ongoing feature.
Yeah, I agree. It's fun. And Mark and Chad are just two guys that you'd want to just sit down. Like I would want to meet up someplace and just have a nice, really sit down cup of coffee and just chat for like hours with these guys about each of our personal takes on Green Lantern and our loves. Even though we do it on the podcast, it's different when you do it in person, and you really see the passion when they're talking about it. And I love hearing Mark's convictions on who he likes and who he enjoys, and they got an interesting relationship just as much as you and I got a great relationship, and it's kind of fun having a partner podcast that gives their time and effort into Green Lantern just as much as we do.
Absolutely, and I want to thank you, Phil, for doing all the heavy lifting on the retro review for this episode.
Oh, anytime, man. I'm all for it. I'm a Kyle Rayner fan, and this one was for all the Kyle Rayner fans out there. And I may not be the best reviewer of everything, but I'll do what I can to promote him and give it to the fans.
All right. Well, we will be back in another week. I hope everybody's enjoying this weekly episode stuff. I hope we're not doing it too frequently, that people are getting a little overwhelmed with the content. But I want to make sure we provide stuff for people to enjoy as we're dealing with being at home during this time period. I don't know how long we can keep this up, and I don't know if we'll do weekly once this is over with. But for now, I'm enjoying being able to get together every week and chat Green Lantern with you, bud.
Well, and it gives us a chance to check in with each other. I mean, I know you're up there in New York, and you guys are impacted a little bit different than we are. But I like knowing that you and I get on here and we talk, and I like hearing to know that you and your family are doing okay. Because there's no worries on our mind besides the worry that's on everybody's mind. And if this takes ourselves out of it for just a little while and gives it back to the fans, more power to it. And like you said, we'll continue to do it as long as we can.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we'll be back next week. I have another person lined up to be interviewed who has been, I think, a Podcast of OA listener since the very beginning and is a part of our Facebook community. And he designed the Seafoam Lantern logo that we used there for a while. So we're going to have him on in the next episode. So I'm looking forward to that. But awesome. until next week when we return, treat each other well, keep your power ring charged, make every day your brightest day.
And we'll see you guys next week.
The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.